Oi, oi, it's your boy, Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you ahead of UFC 244, Masvidal versus Diaz. We're going to be talking about the two realest fighters in MMA fighting for a fake-ass bitch belt. But, fake-ass no wrestling having bitch belt. But, it is a good fight, so we're going to talk about that. A great card, actually. I've been so stoked all week. Just in a really happy place about this card. It's nice to be really excited. And the next card doesn't look too bad either. The next pay-per-view card doesn't look too bad either. If you haven't been keeping up with it, I've been working like an animal all week. We had two Unibet pieces come out. We had Darren Till versus Kelvin Gastelum preview on Monday. We had Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz preview went up earlier today, so check those both out. You can find them through the Fight Primer, or you can find them on my Unibet page. If you want a more structured, formal analysis of stuff. Today we're just going to be rambling about it like we normally do, which I know some people like. And also I did a Stephen Thompson versus Vicente Luque piece for the Patreon boys on the Fight Primer. If you're a Patreon boy, go check that out because it's good. Also because, you know, I figured that was one for the hardcores out there. The connoisseur of fights is set for that one. And of course I had the Filthy Casuals Guide to Jorge Masvidal come out this week. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. If you have seen it, watch it again and share it. Because that's the thing that I never remember to tell people to do. You're supposed to go smash that like button, subscribe, hit the bell, share it with your friends. And if you don't say it, apparently people don't do it. So yeah, go share that with everyone. Next Filthy Casuals Guide will be number 20, I believe. Have you seen all of them? I will put a list on the next one. You can tell me if you've seen all of them. And if you haven't, they're lost forever. Or I might sneak them back up on Vimeo or something. I don't know. Anyway, skipping news. We're going straight into fights. And there really isn't anything else going on this weekend, which is quite cool. Don't have to worry about a Bellator card. Don't have to give them equal coverage, even though they're shit. Just good fights, top to bottom. Let's talk about it. Okay, we'll start with the main event. Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz. I did just say it was the fake-ass bitch belt. The belt is not necessary. And I think that's the whole thing that annoys me about the belt, because these guys were proving that you could headline a pay-per-view in 2019 without any title, you know? Gatti and Ward never fought for a title. Ward never fought for a title again after his first fight with Gatti. If you have good fights, sell them. It's not that hard. And the rest of this card is more than strong enough to make up for it. But the UFC just seem petrified to have anything be, it's why they make interim belts and slap those on posters. They're just terrified to have it be strictly non-title. So they have to keep going, oh, well, the bad motherfucker belt's on the line, of course. Wink, nudge, laugh, but also we're serious, laugh. And it's kind of annoying because it's being, we're all treating it like just a silly trinket thing. It doesn't really matter. And then they'll have Brendan Fitzgerald say, the first defense of that new belt, when they're advertising that fight on their actual broadcast. And then, then they start teasing a BMF division. You're like, for fuck's sake. Ultimately, it's weird enough that Nate Diaz is ranked number 5 welterweight in the world based on beating Anthony Pettis, who was ranked number 5 welterweight in the world based on a Superman punch landing at the right time on Stephen Thompson. Stephen Thompson, enormous list of victories at welterweight over the years. Anthony Pettis comes in, knocks him out, immediately takes his spot. They don't move Thompson down and then move Pettis into the rankings at the bottom end, while all those guys who are actually fighting welterweights and beating them are above him. No, they just slap him straight in where Thompson was, which means that, if Max Holloway decided to fight a welterweight instead of Nate Diaz, he could be the number 5 welterweight in the world right now, because he'd have slapped the shit out of Anthony Pettis anyway. But then weight is just the whole mess in this fight anyway. Jorge Masvidal came up from lightweight because he was having trouble there and thought that he could push the pace better at welterweight. Nate Diaz came up from lightweight because he went down to lightweight because he wasn't good enough to handle the top welterweights, and now he's come back up to welterweight because lightweight's a super competitive division where he basically has no chance of getting a title shot because Khabib's only going to fight 2 more times and they're going to be a year apart. But as a fight, this is very compelling. We talked all about Jorge Masvidal on the Filthy Casuals Guide. Beautiful jab. Lots of swaying away at the waist. Good defensively, but not when he's pushing the action so much. Think about him getting dropped by Rustam Habilov, Darren Cruikshank, all that stuff coming forward. Chasing Stephen Thompson looked very hittable there because he was chasing Stephen Thompson. Really at his best when his opponent comes to him. Though he can go on the offensive. He went on the offensive against James Krause, Donald Cerrone, people like that. He can pressure quite well, but not it's not his A game at all. It doesn't matter because Nate Diaz is probably going to come straight at him. I guess, the same thing that we talk about every time Nate Diaz fights is the low kicks, and there'll always be someone who goes, but he checks low kicks now, and I said on Twitter that's my favourite running gag, that Nate Diaz checks low kicks now. He checked one low kick against Anthony Pettis and managed to mangle Anthony Pettis' foot, but I contend that Anthony Pettis could have kicked him clean in the thigh and probably still would have broken his foot, because that's Anthony Pettis at this point. No, it was a good check, but the whole thing is like he stands side on to operate his normal game. When he wants to check kicks, he starts standing square on and like really light on the lead foot and picking it up. And that's why Conor McGregor, when he was checking the kicks, Conor McGregor could step in and smash him in the head with a left overhand because he was standing on one leg completely out of his usual boxing position. It's like, yes, he can check kicks, but he abandons his A-game to do so. And even weirder in that Pettis fight, like, he fought orthodox for a great deal of it, so that he wasn't taking that southpaw rear leg kick into the back of his lead leg, and he entered behind long steps with his right foot into southpaw stance, or front kicks into southpaw stance. But he also tried to fight from orthodox for a bit, and if you watch him, every time he throws his usual 1-2, spamming 1-2s, that's the Nate Diaz game, but every time he throws his usual 1-2 from orthodox, he gets countered almost immediately. He really overreaches and leans and stuff, and it's clear that he's not nearly as comfortable working orthodox as he is southpaw. But the interesting thing is, of course, like, if he does fight his usual southpaw game against Masvidal, because Masvidal is ordinarily an orthodox fighter, he has fought a couple of fights. Well, he fought Pat Healy almost entirely southpaw, but he fights bits of southpaw in his fights. Mainly, he's an orthodox fighter. But in that matchup, you're talking about all the exploitable flaws in Diaz's stance, about that lead leg being turned in, and the stance being very long and side on. All of that can only be exploited by the lead leg. So you're doing step-up kicks, switch kicks, things like that. Whereas if you think about all those guys who did the kick the lead leg out and run, the kick and turn him, Benson Henderson, Rafael dos Anjos, Conor McGregor, Josh Thompson to a degree. Actually, did Josh Thompson really do? Well, Josh Thompson did do that, but I can't remember if he was southpaw. But those other three, all southpaws. So, he's not set up to kick that as easily as if he were an actual southpaw, but I'm sure Jorge Masvidal can get to it. The thing is, like, really noticeable in that Anthony Pettis fight, all he wanted to do was kick and run. There was no other plan. And when he did hit Diaz in the body coming in or with counter punches, he did well, but mostly he was focused on that kick and run, and then he hurt his leg and he was like, oh no, I can't fight now. Masvidal generally, and this is something I said in both my Unibet article and my Filthy Casuals guide, very good at taking what he's got and tuning it, shooting the ratios, playing with the sliders. I know fucking nothing about producing music or even a podcast, but playing with the sliders and just balancing out the performance to suit the opponent. So if he needs to be aggressive, he'll be aggressive, but he'll do the stuff he does aggressively. If he needs to kick the leg, he'll kick the leg, but between all his jab and body shots and stuff. He's very good at adapting his game to exploit the opponent's weaknesses without fixedly focusing on just that weakness. I suppose it's interesting that, Nate Diaz, all about the pressure, but very inefficient. I don't want to be like Conor McGregor, inefficient with my energy, but very inefficient in how he does it, in that, like, he's running after dudes to smother them rather than cutting off the cage and engaging them that way. And it was the same with Nick too, put on an amazing pace, but it takes you a while to actually get to the opponent because you're not really cutting the ring very well, especially if you're standing like side on like both of them do. Something that's quite intriguing to me in this one is that going back through all of Masvidal's fights, which I did for that Filthy Casuals guide, which is why it took so fucking long, it also ended up being the longest Filthy Casuals guide so far. Yeah, Masvidal, I sort of noticed a couple of habits with him that he struggles a bit with longer opponents who throw straight, like James Krause, Tim Means, Darren Till, people like that, but also with southpaws. He got caught with left straights from Michael Chiesa, of all people, who's another gangly-ass southpaw. The southpaw thing particularly seems to be because if the southpaw hand fights, and some don't, like sometimes the Diazes don't bother hand fighting at all, like Johnny Hendricks hand fought with GSP, completely removed his jab. Nick Diaz didn't hand fight with GSP, got jabbed in the face a ton of times. When the southpaws do hand fight with Jorge Masvidal, it makes jabbing very complicated for him. And if you've got that as like your main weapon and you're going to build off it, it makes things a lot more complicated. So against people like Tim Means, he was trying to throw right straights instead of just jabbing. He'd throw right straights and right body kicks, and he'd be there to hit afterwards. He'd have to square up to do it and then be there to hit. Whereas his jab is, he's very good at snapping that off and then immediately pulling away or just keeping down behind the shoulder and safe. If you watch the Till fight, obviously Till has his own defensive flaws, pulling straight back, going straight back on the line, having his head way up in the air, stuff that he needs to work on. But in that fight, you noticed Till came out lead hand on Masvidal's lead hand. Masvidal's jab was, I think I saw him land like one good one coming in when Darren Till basically dropped his lead hand as he was coming in to throw the left straight. But most of that fight, Masvidal's jab couldn't get to him because Till was right hand on left hand and shooting that left straight down the center so fast. And, Masvidal had to gut his way through the first part of that fight because he was taking straight blows and he's having to try and come back around with like roundhouse blows to get back at him. And obviously he caught him in the end. He followed him back with a nice, jab overhand left. I think, he switched to southpaw for that one too. But, he had his jab taken away and he had to go around the side and it made it very awkward for him. So I'm very interested to see what Nate Diaz can do in that regard. Nate Diaz also a very underrated clinch fighter. Does very well pushing people to the fence and like posting their head and kneeing their body and punching them and just keeping the pace high in those positions that kind of suck. Whereas Jorge Masvidal, really hard to take down. When he gets taken down, he pops up. He's using the guillotine, the switch, and the stand-up as like a triple threat. Again, watch the Filthy Casual's guide. But doesn't really strike from the clinch very well. I mean, we can all point to the Cesar Ferreira knockout, and he landed a couple of good elbows against Lawrence Larkin. But generally, his clinch is more like keeping the opponent off him. And that's why in some of these rounds that he drops on the scorecards, he's technically great because he's not being taken down, but also he's not doing anything, so he loses them on the scorecards. Which takes us on to the issue generally that I'm quite intrigued by. Jorge Masvidal is known now as like this amazing knockout artist because he picked up 2 knockouts in a row. And that it does tell you, all you need is 2 good fights in a row and it can change people's perception of you entirely. A lot of people didn't even know about Jorge Masvidal before this fight, or just, he was a background character, mid-carder chap. But I always think of Rashad Evans versus Chuck Liddell and Forrest Griffin. Rashad Evans never knocks anyone out, knocks out Chuck Liddell, knocks out Forrest Griffin. Suddenly he's an amazing knockout artist, but basically never knocked anyone out again. Or Jeremy Stevens and his 2 knockout wins in the UFC or whatever it is. But anyway, Masvidal's riding high on these 2 knockout wins over Darren Till and Ben Askren. But before that, very decision-y, is that a word? Decision-y fighter is a word now. And particularly if you watched him, you knew, when people talk about this BMF stuff, they get pissy because, yes, it is like the UFC slapping a token belt on guys who aren't at the top of the division and probably won't be at the top of the division because they struggle to keep the wins together. And there's all this argument about journeymen or gatekeepers or whatever. And people always bring up that Masvidal has 13 losses. But with the exception of the Stephen Thompson one, you have to go back to Gilbert Melendez in 2011 to get a really decisive loss. Rustam Kabilov, Al Iaquinta, Lorenz Larkin, Benson Henderson, Damian Maia, all fights that he could have won on the scorecards. And all of those fights, the criticism of Masvidal by me, by everyone, has always been he fights like he knows he's ahead, and like the judges should know he's ahead, and then doesn't do anything about it. He's basically got a scoreboard in his head. He's very technically slick, so he's like, he's not taking me down. I'm slipping these punches, but doesn't do enough on his own. And his coaches, he and his coaches, when he went up to welterweight, said that some of that might have been to do with not being in as good shape as he could be and not really pushing his advantages in the 3rd round. He's been to the 3rd round a couple of times since going up to welterweight. He fought Benson Henderson at welterweight in a main event, actually, for 5 rounds. I seem to recall he looked all right in the later stages of that. Even after that, lost a decision to Larkin because he didn't do enough. But the interesting part to me is that, if they're acknowledging that they wanted to cut less weight so that they could put more activity together in the later rounds and not drop these decisions, it makes me wonder if, if his conditioning is going to hold up to 5 rounds of Nate Diaz staying in his face. And that's where that clinch stuff is really annoying because if you're being mauled by, or not mauled, but if you're being attacked by Pat Healy, he's trying to drop on your hips and pull your legs out over and over again. Not quite the same as when Nate Diaz has you against the fence and he's just annoying you with his short shots over and over again, knees to the body, knees to the legs, and just staying on you and hitting you the entire time. That can take it out of you quicker, well, especially if you're an amazing anti-wrestler like Jorge Masvidal, that can take it out of you pretty quickly. So ultimately, what I'm thinking is, Masvidal, can he mix it up and apply the low kicks and the movement? Can he stay off the fence? Because I've seen him do it against like KJ Noons and people back in the day. He had pretty good evasions along the fence and getting off the fence, but can he keep doing that round after round? Can he get to the leg? Can he use the jab? And really, you'd love to see him using some elbows on the brakes, because against any Diaz, elbows on the brakes. Against anyone with scar tissue all over their face, elbows on the brakes, really important. Conor McGregor in their second fight, those elbows on the brakes cut Nate open and he was bleeding into his eyes, and that makes hitting people a lot easier. The other thing that quite intrigues me is body work from Masvidal, because the Diaz is obviously value body work. Nate, not nearly so much as Nick in the punching regards, but certainly along the fence he does a lot of body work. But they both take a body shot, not great either. And if you watch the Pettis fight, Pettis was able to get to Nate's body pretty well, especially because he was using like a high guard the entire time. If you watch the second McGregor fight, the ebbs and flows of that fight are fantastic, because it starts out with McGregor kicking Diaz's leg and knocking him over with punches while he's on one leg, and then Diaz starts covering up and just walking him down, and then, you know, that's when he has his like third and fourth round rally, and by the fourth and fifth round, McGregor's realised that if his hands are high, he can shackle them and turn over the elbows, you know, double hand check, turn over the elbow, or he can really get to the body, so he throws a lot of body shots and a front kick to the body, and he really badly wins Nate throughout that last round. So yeah, getting to the body, always a good idea against Nate Diaz, I feel. Especially as he's got a head like a fucking rock. You know, I said this way back in the day, I think this was before Thompson versus Nate. You know, none of them had it, well, I mean, Nick got knocked out in like his first fight back in the day, but it was like a TKO. But they, you know, they've been unknockoutable. And I just said, someone will knock these guys out eventually, but building your game plan around being the first, I wouldn't bother. Just, you know, set up a good game plan where you're going over and over again, doing the right things, moving out of position, keeping the turning, scoring the punches, and then if you knock them out, that's just a bonus. You know, you can't rely on being able to knock people like that out. So hitting the body, great idea. Anyway, the top three fights of this card are just banging, well, I was going to say banging welterweight bouts, but no, actually, the co-main event is a middleweight bout. They've made Darren Till go up. He's in the same position as Kelvin Gastelum was like 4 years ago. Yeah, this is a tricky one. I mean, I wrote a full article on this one. Go read it on Unibet. But I think for me, the trickiness is that Darren Till is so quick and very hard-hitting with his straight blows and stuff. But he does always pull back with his head straight up in the air. Not very defensively sound. And Kelvin Gastelum is the kind of guy who'll follow you back. You know, he'll take that punch on the face and he'll just follow you back with his quick 1-2 or whatever. And he closes distance very, very quickly. That's something that's really helped him being a smaller guy in that weight class. He bounces and gets across the floor so fast. I mean, he did it to Israel Adesanya, who is so long, always has a frame out there stopping you from coming in on him, is angling off whenever he moves back, and he still got to him because he's just really good at closing the distance. Some of the intrigue in this one is that you've got two southpaws matching up. Kelvin Gastelum always been really good at threading the left straight down the centre, but both of them have been really good at threading the left straight down the centre, but that's being the southpaw against the orthodox fighter. That angle is there nicely. When you're southpaw versus southpaw, it's exactly the same as orthodox versus orthodox. Lead shoulders line up so that they're in the way of the opponent's rear hand. A little bit trickier to get in straight away. You know, you can't just step down the outside of their lead foot and plant it in. Typically takes some smarter doing. Look for more overhands, things like that. Or that lead hook while bouncing off to the side so that you can line your shoulder up and shoot the left straight down the centre. That Mark Hunt favourite. But really, I want to see Till go back to kicking more. Obviously hard to do against a wrestler of Gastelum's ability, but even still, Till should be bigger than him. Till's a massive dude for a welterweight. So he should hopefully be able to defend the takedowns okay. It's just like the whole thing with Till is it's one shot at a time, and it's so defensively porous. You know, it's almost a disrespect for the opponent's blows. And if you always think that they're not going to be able to hurt you, and you don't really care about them hitting you, they're going to hit you when you're not expecting it at some point. And those are the ones that turn your lights off. But throughout his entire UFC run, it's been like one kick at a time, one punch at a time. And he's so fast, but like one elbow at the time. I can't remember who it was, but he steps so deep to elbow this dude, like no regard for his own safety. And it's all just one at a time. If you watch him when he's, occasionally he'll throw a 1-2 and he's got a fast fucking jab. Like he did it to Cerrone, he did it to Masvidal. He shoots it straight up the center of their guard. So, like, basically he'll hand fight and then shoot it inside their lead hand, which means that you're basically putting your hand inside their parry and still trying to get to their face. And if you have to be quick to do it and get the timing right. But he's so good at it, and he's great when you see him throw 1-2 off that. But generally, it's like one at a time, and you feel like there's a lot more that he could be doing. I don't know. I think Conor McGregor was putting out a thing this week complaining about, like, it was sort of a veiled criticism of Darren Till, but he was complaining about fighters who just do pad work and they only spar with people that they can beat up and stuff like that. A good way to go about it is to have a defense that's fairly sound and use that as a platform for your offense. Whereas Darren Till's very much like, I'm really fucking quick and I'm going to just blow you out of the water and keep pulling my head away whenever you're trying to hit me back. So yeah, I mean, that probably going to be explosive. It's just going to be left straights and counter left straights and dudes trying to catch each other with their chins up in the air. Vicente Luque versus Stephen Thompson. This is my kind of jam. This is the one I'm looking forward to. You got two counter fighters here, but a lot of people wouldn't consider Vicente Luque a counter fighter because he goes forward all the time. But his best blows tend to be like his cross counter, so his right hand over the top of the opponent's jab, or his counter left hook, like closing the door, which is the one that he knocked out Lepre with and Bilal Muhammad. And that's the one that I'm interested to see against Stephen Thompson, because Stephen Thompson does do that sort of like coming in from long range stuff. And against people like Jorge Masvidal, he was actually throwing more combinations and hanging around a little longer. So Thompson is a guy who counters when guys are like moving towards him. He's countering forward movement more than he is like any individual punch. Has a good lean back check hook with his lead hand from both stances. Did that well against Tyron Woodley in their their first fight. So he has that, but generally gets you walking towards him, and then he'll hop in, shoot straight down the center, and then move off to another angle. Little V-step, as we call it. Did a piece on that called Stick and Move, The Meaning of Angles, which is up on the Fight Primer for the Patreon boys. Or just watch the Filthy Casuals guide, because there's a clip of him, there's a couple of clips of him doing that to Jorge Masvidal. They come towards you, you shoot in on a straight line, you go out a side door, and suddenly you're over the other side of the ring. It's like the punch didn't even matter. It was just a means to get over there, and that's incredibly frustrating to deal with. I wrote a whole article on this, so I'll sum it up briefly, because I think the thing that's going to make this hard, provided Thompson doesn't make a massive mistake, or just get caught, like the Superman punch from Anthony Pettis off the fence, came out of nowhere, caught him. I was watching that fight knowing that was the end, having seen a clip of it on Twitter, and going, yeah, he's getting to the low kicks, that's going to set up a Superman punch. And then it was nothing to do with that. It was just like 2 minutes later, he hadn't kicked his legs at all, just did a Superman punch off the cage. It can happen. So much of Luke's game is catching guys coming in, and so much of Thompson's game is hiding when he comes in. And I think where Luke, when he does really well, it's backing Nico Price up towards the fence. Nico Price goes, oh, fuck, I'm on the fence, lashes at him, and Luke just throws across the top and sparks him. Well, didn't spark him, like knocked him down and darsed him, didn't he? That doesn't really, that's hard to see happening to Stephen Thompson, because Stephen Thompson is very good at knowing where he is in the cage. It's very hard to put him under pressure, because he's always like, well, I'm getting a little bit close to the cage, I'll just angle off now. Whereas almost everyone else in MMA only thinks about getting off the cage once they've hit the cage. So if Luke can back him up to the cage and force him to leave his stance a bit, because when Thompson gets towards the cage, he leaves his side-on stance and he starts circling side to side, and that makes you more hittable, but it also takes away that lead leg kicking game, the jamming stuff, takes away the drop away open side counter a lot of the time too. It sets him up differently. He's not as evasive, and of course he doesn't have the straight retreat either. So that's always a good advantage. If you can kick the legs when you get Thompson sidestepping, kick the body. I mean, Jorge Masvidal had success with both leg kicks and body kicks along the fence. But trying to force engagements, that's going to take some doing against Stephen Thompson, because he, as I said in the article, he just relishes space. Like, he's never rushed. And that's why he's like a 15 strike a round fighter. But it's always good when he lands, but he doesn't rush at all. He takes his time. He goes, no, that was just a feint, sorry. And then he'll throw like a couple of strikes later on. Whereas Luque is at his best when he gets the opponent flustered. He gets in their face, forces more and more stuff to happen. So, I mean, I always say footwork's the key, but I think more than anything in this fight, footwork's the key, unless Thompson makes a really dumb mistake. But to be honest, Thompson could get knocked out by Luque in this fight, and still, if you let him come around, whoever wins the main event, he could take the BMF title off them if he was eligible to compete for it. Because those guys both really struggle with guys circling on them when they're coming forwards. And Stephen Thompson is one of the best evasive ring generals in the UFC. Derek Lewis versus Blagoy Ivanov. Who the fuck cares? Kevin Lee versus Gregor Gillespie. That's a banger. You got two different kinds of wrestler there. Gregor Gillespie, I really like what he's done with his boxing. It's kind of basic, but he's got a good pull right hand counter, got a good overhand across the top of his opponent's jab. He's got a couple of good meat and potato boxing counters, and they hide his level change quite nicely. He just does that little level change, like you're ducking in a boxing match, and then gets on the hips. He's not like a knee into the mat, shoot from long range, Kevin Randleman style shot. And he times it so well that he gets guys down all the time. Hasn't really faced much adversity in the UFC that I can think of. Now, of course, the interesting thing is that Kevin Lee, very much a front runner. Even in his fight against Al Iaquinta, which everyone seems to paint as just Iaquinta murked him. But through the early going of that fight, it was all Lee, and then he just got tired, and then it was all Iaquinta. He really does fight like one of the worst sort of front runners that you can imagine. And that's why that Michael Chiesa fight was so weird, because Michael Chiesa is even more of a front runner than him. It's like, Michael Chiesa, I'm going to submit them in the first round. Oh, fuck no. He had a half of a good first round, and then suddenly Kevin Lee was like, I've aged better than you in this fight. But again, like Tony Ferguson, Al Iaquinta, Rafael dos Anjos, all those fights got worse as they went on, and Kevin Lee got tired. The Edson Barbosa fight was better because he was, he was basically the hammer in that fight, and Edson Barbosa was the nail. There wasn't a lot coming back. But even then, he was getting a little bit sloppier towards the end, like that wheel kick that caught him and stuff. His conditioning has been an issue. And I thought that going up to welterweight was part of trying to deal with that, but now he's back down to lightweight, so that'll be interesting. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Lee is that Gregor Gillespie is kind of like he's an interesting sort of scrambly wrestler. He does stuff with a crab ride. He gets back body lock and puts his shins in the back of the opponent's knees and stuff, like the Meows, almost. But Kevin Lee is just a crushing guard passer. Great stuff along the fence, short doubles along the fence constantly, shoots onto the fence and bounces people off, that old Randy Couture trick, and just beastly from back control. And it's kind of weird, like the Iaquinta fight especially, like you watched him get the figure four body triangle, whatever you want to call it, on Iaquinta's back, get within inches of finishing him, and then the moment that he couldn't, or like Iaquinta started slipping towards him and back into closed guard or whatever, you just went, uh-oh, that's not good, because it feels like every moment up to almost winning, he gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Then the moment the opponent gets away, it all goes tits up. I suppose what'll be interesting in this fight is if Lee can stuff the takedowns, and can he get to it with his striking, because while Gregor Gillespie has met some goodish strikers, he hasn't met any that have been capable of just making him strike with them. And I think that at least Lee will be able to do that for the early going. Or maybe Gregor Gillespie comes out and he manhandles him like he's Yancy Medeiros. I can't see that being the case. It's certainly in the early going. But it would be pretty amazing if he does. Like, if it doesn't make any difference if you're Yancy Medeiros or a really good wrestler like Kevin Lee. But as much as Lee has had like a rough run lately, he's 3-1 in his last 4, but good performance against Tony Ferguson. So really only the last 2 were hitting the skids, but he's so much better than anyone that Gregor Gillespie's faced. It's a big step up for Gillespie, and if you've been very excited about Gillespie for a while, like I have, that's quite exciting. Right, so just quickly running down the rest of this card, because I've talked for a while now. Julio Arce is on. He's quite fun, and he's fighting Hakeem Duodo, who is also very fun. Julio Arce, I remember him from that fight that he got knocked down, and he was inverted with his arse in the air, Julio Arce, and using like his hamstrings to stop punches. It was fantastic. Caitlin Chookagian versus Jennifer Maia. Fair enough. Andrei Arlovski versus Rosenstruck. Yeah, I mean, that's nice and low on the card, at least, not in like the main card. Brad Tavares is back versus Edmund Shabazian. Shabazian riding high on a win over Jack Marshman, the winner of the Battle of Wales. That was so fucking bad. Corey Anderson versus Johnny Walker. That, I suppose, is the... we keep being like, this will prove whether Johnny Walker is legit or not, and then it doesn't. He's got 23... What is it? He's thrown something like 18 strikes in the UFC, and 23% of them have caused knockouts. He's not done a lot, but he has also done a lot. Killed a lot of... killed some decent opponents with very little offensive output. For Anderson, you just got to think, get scrappy, just push into clinches. You don't need takedowns, you just need to make him work. Because what I've seen of Johnny Hendricks on the regional scene, he did slow down in the later rounds, and it wasn't... Certainly, it's impressive to do weird shit and knock people out, but it is a 3-round contest. It's 15 minutes. If you can get him into the 12th minute and he's suddenly, gassed, that's going to be a big problem. And you've got to know, if he ever gets to fight with John Jones is not going to engage him in, the first round. He's going to arse around, move, shoot side kicks into his shin from miles away, duck into clinches as soon as Johnny Walker opens up with anything. He's not going to be out there fighting Johnny Walker. He's going to be out there making Johnny Walker work and then beating on him in the later round. So Corey Anderson can do that, can just get into clinches, stay safe, make it ugly. We'll get to see more of Johnny Walker, or maybe Johnny Walker meme kicks him in the head and knocks him out. And then Shane Burgos versus Makwan Amakani. I'm quite excited for this one. I feel like I haven't seen much of Makwan Amakani in forever. He's had about 2 fights in the last 2 years, I feel like. Because everyone was so hot on him, and he lost that decision to Arnold Allen, who, is awesome in his own right. He's no Masvidal, but he's pretty awesome. But then since then, when was that? It was 2017. He fought once in 2018. He's fought once this year already. But he anacondaed Chris Fishgold in his last fight. But, the hype just sort of subsided for him, and he's still a very good fighter. And Shane Burgos obviously coming off that win over Cub Swanson. Maybe not as dominant as... Well, it was pretty convincing, but not as dominant as you'd want, being a young up-and-coming guy who's a great striker against an old guy who's sort of on the way out, really. But anyway, I reckon that'll do us for today. I just wanted to get this out before the fights, because I've done a lot of work this week, but I didn't put out this podcast until late, so get your fill of my hot takes and shit, and then we'll be back here on Monday to talk about the results. Hopefully we get some good fucking fights off this one. Any card can turn out to be full of snoozers, but I'm just looking down this card and going, those are some fucking banging matchups. If you want to get on the Patreon and read the extra stuff that we do, and support me doing this podcast twice a week, go ahead and do that. If you want to read all the pieces I've done this week, go to fightprimer.com, and if you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Bitch ass no wrestling belt bless.